One night me and my friend Sam decided to go smoke somewhere. I get into his beat-up Ford and we set off. I lived in Vermont where there were plenty of turnoffs and hidden smoke spots you just had to look for to find. So this night, Sam and I were bored and we decided to go find a new smoke spot. It was one of those nights you could already tell we were going to be going out until at least 3 a.m. type of nights. Luckily, I had told my parents that I was staying at his house that night and his mom wasn't really around much and didn't care what time we got back. We left his house around 10:30, went to the local dealer, picked up some bud and started driving down the usual back roads that we've lived on our whole life. We start taking random turns just to go on some roads we haven't been on yet, and after a while we still weren't making any progress. We were still in high school, so any sign of life or the possibility of a spot having a cop freaked us out and narrowed down our options quite a bit. Eventually we found ourselves quite literally in the middle of nowhere, just driving down winding back roads. I see what looks like a spot with some potential, a turnoff with no sign or marking of any kind. We turn up the road in his beat-up white Ford and head up what appears to be an access road to some power lines. After a while of driving up this access road, which was just 2 tire tracks separated by some grass, we get to the top and there's a small clearing and a makeshift parking lot where some service vehicles are able to have access to the power lines. We set up in the front seat with the car on and headlights still on, pointed at the forest while we hit a few bowls from the tube. After a little time there was a lull in the conversation and we were both just kinda baked as hell looking at the forest in front of us that the headlights have light up. Suddenly, Sam sits up from his seat and asks me, "Is that a deer?" I sit up in the front seat and look out the window to what he is pointing at. From where I was sitting it looked like a deer resting in the gravel, but it was sitting almost unnaturally. Sam threw the car into gear and pulled up along next to it. We both got out, turned the car off and pulled out our phone flashlights. We walk over next to it. We realize it is a deer, but not all of it. It was the head and the skin, but there was no meat on it or any blood, just the head attached to the skin. We both kind of just started saying to each other things like, "What the fuck," as we looked at it for a bit. "Why would a hunter fully clean a deer and just leave the head and the skin?" I said, a little off put all of the sudden. "I don't know, man," he says as he picks up a stick. He flips it over and some strange symbol is carved into the other side of it. It looked almost like a plus sign, except all of the lines were curved and it was embellished with some strange accent marks. We didn't think to take a picture of it, but in hindsight we probably should have. Almost right after this we hear noises coming from down along the power lines. For those of you who don't know, when there are big power lines running through the forest, they clear all of the forest under it, which leaves a narrow strip of clearing stretching the length of the power lines. The access road was on a ridge line of sorts and the power line ran perpendicular to the ridge, so we could see all the way down the hill into the valley and then up the other side through the narrow strip of clearing where there weren't any trees. Right after we hear the noises we turn our flashlights off, since both of us assumed that it was some service workers about to bust us, since who the hell else would be up here? We both stopped and listened to the sounds for a second. They were pretty distant, so we moved to the edge of the gravel lot to where we could hear them better. We hear the noises getting louder. It sounded like a bunch of people breaking sticks, and all of a sudden we see 20 to 25 people burst out of the tree line about 100 yards down from us, full on sprinting from tree line to tree line across the clearing. The starlight was bright enough to where I could make out that the men were wearing all black Amish looking clothing but without the hats, and the women were wearing all white dresses holding them above their knees, sprinting across the clearing. We had no idea why they were running, but almost instantaneously me and Sam had the same idea. We both made a beeline for his car and Sam peeled out of the gravel parking spot and headed back down the access road. The entire time in the passenger seat I'm just saying, "What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck?" We both just start laughing at the insanity of what we just saw. At this point we must be doing 60 down this barely marked road when out of nowhere in a split second I see 2 shining dots in front of us, then huge yellow eyes, and then this massive silhouette that fills the whole windshield, and then bang. We both audibly screamed and my balls went so far up into my body. Sam slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Was that a fucking OWL?" I just remember screaming, "We are not fucking stopping." Go 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 go. We make it back onto the main road and then back to his house at around 2:30 a.m. and smoke some more and just talk about what the fuck we just saw. To this day we still talk about it and neither of us know what we saw. Were those people running towards something or away from something? No idea. Although it doesn't really make much sense, we both feel like the owl was related to what we saw, we just don't know how. The old farm I lived in was a very interesting place. The suitcase lid fall on the suitcase, out of nowhere. It was surprising, but after all, not very strange. What's strange is that the sound it produced while slowly falling inside the suitcase lasted for a solid 10 seconds. So long my GF woke up and had the opportunity to grab my hand in fear while listening to this never-ending sound. I switched on the light, saw the suitcase and immediately understood that the lid felt, then slid inside the suitcase. But that sound. Both of us were pretty disturbed by its duration. It was way too long for a lid falling and just sliding a bit inside. Way too long. The second strange activity was, the steps above our room. As I said, the first floor was unoccupied. Same bedroom, other night. Maybe a noise woke me up, I don't know, but I remember hearing steps in the room above us. The ceiling was not soundproofed, and I distinctly heard the floorboard squeak, one after the other, slowly moving from what I knew was the main door to the other side of the room. Maybe 3 or 4 steps, and a consequent weight applied on the floor. The steps never went back, and there was only one door to enter or leave the first floor. I had trouble falling asleep that night. The next morning, I went to the door and saw it was closed, but unlocked. I opened it a bit, asked if somebody was there, but quickly went to warn the landlord, who lived on the same field, in a much recent house he built just next to the farm. No, it's locked, he said. We went to check, it was unlocked, at his surprise, but no trace of a fraction, and no visible footprint. He took the occasion to tell me about the farm story, and about his 2 aunts, 2 sisters, that lived on the first floor, and even died there. They were buried, and from that moment, the place stayed unoccupied. This one could easily be explainable, but just adds to the overall atmosphere. I won't elaborate too much on that night where my girlfriend woke me up in fear, telling me that she heard someone talk in the bathroom. The bathroom shared a wall with our bedroom on the bedhead side. She was so sure. She was really terrified. Plot twist, there was nobody. We moved our bed into another room. The first one was too humid. The new room was in the middle of the house. We could access it by a door, and an other entrance had been made from the newly built extension. We closed this side with a simple curtain. From this time, something unnerving started for me. In fact, 2 things. First, the constant sensation of being watched, was it from the door or the curtain side? I started to experience these fears you have when you're still a child. The need to hide under the blanket to feel better. Then, the noise. How many times do I woke up at night, this sound buzzing around? I checked everywhere. Hot water balloon, fridge, electricity, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the TV. Even with the electricity switched off. It came from nowhere, and was just everywhere. My girlfriend could not hear it, and it drove me insane. Only at night. The most strange thing is to come, and it happened in the evenings. I used to come from work around 6 p.m., my GF arriving much later, between 7 and 7:30. Most of the time, I was geeking or working on the computer while waiting for her, or cooking in the kitchen. As I said, it was an old farm. The computer was in the recent extension, a room adjacent to the main room. To go to the main door, I had to leave the extension and enter the main room, which consisted of a living room and a kitchen. The entrance door being in the kitchen, old-style farms. How many times did I hear the front door clack while I was on the computer? The clack a door can do when you close it without using the knob just by pushing it. The first time, I thought, hey, GF arrived, and just saved the game, shut down the computer, and entered the main room to see absolutely nobody. The door was still closed. Locked. And it happened, and happened again. Not the same hour each time, but around this time. Sometimes 6:30 p.m., sometimes around 7 p.m., sometimes later. Not every day. Just, sometimes. Clack. The keys were never moving, or too subtly to be noticeable. If I stayed in the living room, it did not happen. I tried to move everything. Blinds, windows, drawers, everything, to see if something could move and make that noise. I found nothing. I checked every evening that I was closing the door correctly, being sure I could hear the clack so it would not happen later, but it changed nothing. We moved out in 2016. My father came to help us, and spent the night sleeping on the sofa. Without telling too much about him, he's retired from the army. A big and solid guy, who is impossible to scare, not versed on any paranormal stuff, someone very, strongly realistic. The morning after his night on the sofa, he had a pretty bad face. I asked if the sofa was okay, and he said, the sofa was okay, but I couldn't sleep well. I had the sensation that someone was watching me all night. That shook me, really, and it would have shocked anyone knowing him. Well, we left the house, and never heard about it again. Never, until 6 months later. I received a phone call, one day, by someone I registered as House Visit 3. Before leaving the house, the landlord gave my number to the people coming to check the house to rent it. Maybe 4 or 5 couples came to check. I saved the phone numbers each time. So this, House Visit 3, called me. Hey, that's me, don't remember her name. I call you for a reason. Well, I'm sorry, it's strange. Anyway. My boyfriend hears some sound at night in the house, and I wanted to know if you heard them too and know where they come from. Because I can't hear them myself. I laughed, but not a real laugh. I explained to her what I used to hear at night, only the hum sound, because I think that's what she was talking about. Sorry, never found the origin. My GF couldn't hear it either. We joked a bit, I think I forgot nothing, but I will update if I notice something is missing. Thanks for having read until the end. As I said, nothing spectacular, just strange. A few strange things happened since, in our new house, but nothing like this old farm. I used to manage a crew that we would be called out by different departments such as sheriffs, police, fire departments and other public and private agencies, after accidental deaths, suicides, homicides, unattended deaths, explosions, fire deaths, and pretty much anything else you could ever possibly imagine that might have happened in a home or building. This particular one happened sometime around 1998 in Southern California. It was during a very cold time of year and snowed in places that it normally didn't, so it was unseasonably cold for our area. Lots of people struggled to keep warm. I saw a post on Facebook about using your oven to keep your house warm, and suddenly I remembered this call that I was dispatched to. Although I had, over the years, received similar calls usually involving elderly people or someone living alone. This time it was a family. The house was in a very working class section in a suburb of northeast Los Angeles, and as far as what the scene looked like, it wasn't my typical blood, gunshots, and body parts kind of scene. We were contacted by a property manager who was contacted by the authorities about what had happened to the home. It was a rental home, small, like 2-bedroom house. Like I said, it wasn't a very violent scene and hardly anything really for us to clean up. The scene, we got access to the property and we were asked to dispose of certain items, mainly the beds. This was odd to us because there were hardly any bodily fluids on the bed. Sometimes when people die, the rate of decomposition depends on certain factors, so upon first look it didn't seem too bad. We were only told that the family all died in the house and that it was an accidental death. Typically, when we hear about an entire family expiring in the house, it's usually murder/suicide or something tragic like a house fire. This time what had happened was, the family was struggling to keep warm. The dad placed a kerosene heater and a small camping stove type of thing inside the house. The house didn't have smoke detectors, nor were carbon monoxide detectors really available back then. The family all went to bed and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. From what we could gather, most of them died in their beds, but maybe one of the kids died on the living room sofa, as there were signs that one of them was there. Since the heaters were on the entire time and it was days before anyone checked in on the family, the unusual situation sped up decomposition. That is why we were called out to the house. They asked us to remove the beds and sofa and any other soft material in the house that smelled like decomp. We ended up having to remove carpets, as the owner just said to remove it all. The living relatives came to remove personal effects from the house, but we had to deal with removing the decomp odor and clean up enough so that it wasn't too bad. When we started, on some of the items you could still see signs where the bodies were. Sometimes when skin come into contact with a surface it sticks to it along with hair and sometimes even eyelashes, and that skin that sticks to the fabric turns black, so it almost looks like a shadow of the person left behind. The coroner usually takes the bodies long before we arrive, however they do not take everything, and that usually leaves work for us to clean up. The things that haunted me most about scenes like this one, it's how normal everything looks inside. Just an everyday home that a family lived in, doing their best to struggle and live. Unfortunately, not knowing that using those types of heaters inside will cause you to die. I can remember seeing, inside the kids' room, yellow stuffed animal bear on the bed. The little girl probably went to bed with it that night she died.